Hello, everybody. This is Jeff Brown in Beijing, author of Reflections in Sinoland and 44 Days Backpacking in China. I've had a couple interviews in the last 2 weeks with a couple of fine gentlemen back in the United States, and I decided that it would be a great idea to have a radio program on the 44 Days website and the Reflections in Sinoland column, because it is continuing. I continue to be appalled at the lack of good coverage about what's going on in China, which is one of the most amazing stories that can be told for the 21st century. So about once every week or two, I'm going to get on here for a few minutes and talk about some of the things that I am sure you have not heard about in the mainstream media. First one is China will build a space station starting in 2018. They have Russian rockets, and of course the Russians have international space station experience. I don't think it was an accident that about 2 weeks before that, the Russians said that they would be leaving definitively the International Space Station in 2024, that they would no longer cooperate with the Europeans and the Americans. I think they will likely combine with the Chinese and use Russian rocket engines and build their own Sino-Russian space station and leave out the European Space Agency and NASA, who have no money left, it seems like, because of the fact that the West has and continues to cut taxes for the 1%, and so they're broke. Another thing that was very interesting last week that was completely buried in the Western press is China reaffirmed its strong commitment to Russia in spite of Western expectations to hopefully follow the West's demonization of Russia with all of the onerous sanctions and the contrived oil price drop to help hurt the Russian economy and the Venezuela's and Iran's and others. The foreign minister of China, Mr. Wang Yi, was unequivocal. He came out and said that China would continue to work with Russia based on mutual needs and respect. And one of the things that I found very interesting is I heard a talk from a distinguished journalist, Jonathan Fimby, here in Beijing about 10 days ago, and it was actually a pretty decent talk. But one of the things that I got a big chuckle out of is he said that China only has one ally in the world, and that's North Korea, which is just literal propaganda, Western propaganda, mainstream propaganda. Russia and China are absolutely like like Siamese twins right now, a double helix like DNA. They are doing what's known as intrusive sharing of their economies, their politics, their trade, their military, their intelligence, to combat what they see as a existential threat by the United States to overthrow their governments and or balkanize these two massive continent-sized countries, so that they can the West can exploit their vast natural and human resources. So to say that China only has North Korea as an ally is absolute bunk. The next time someone that you talk to someone about that. The Chinese had their National People's Congress this last week. It went very, very well. They talked a lot about environmental pollution and corruption. Those are the two big issues that in poll after poll the Chinese people are the most concerned about, and the National People's Congress addressed that. And we'll have to see. I don't need to go into a lot of details, but one of the big ones is that they will be the Chinese said that by 2030 they would reduce their consumption of coal by 150 million tons, and I'm sure they will do that because the people are starting to demand cleaner air and cleaner environments. Another big hilarious thing that happened just this week is first the United Kingdom, and then very soon thereafter France, Germany, and Italy. So that makes the 4 biggest European economies in the European Union came out and said that they would join China's Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, the AIIB. This is a bank that China, Xi Jinping, came out in January of 2014, and by November of 2014, the bank was created, and at the APEC meeting in November of last year, November 2014, 20 countries lined up behind the AIIB in spite of extreme pressure, threats, etc., from the United States for the countries not to join. The only 3 that did not are the vassal states of South Korea, Japan, and Australia. Indonesia joined a couple weeks later because they had just had national elections and a new president was elected. But it's absolutely hysterical that the 4 largest economies in Europe have now joined China's bank, which will be a direct competitor against the Asian Development Bank, which is heavily controlled by Japan and the United States, actually totally controlled by Japan and the United States. And it was interesting, in an article in the Financial Times, it said that these 4 countries disregarded the instructions of the United States not to join the AIIB. So to be an ally, a supposed ally of the United States, you take instructions from Washington on how to conduct your foreign affairs. For the 5th month in a row, China has cut back on its U.S. Treasury debt. I think it's insignificant, to be honest with you. I know gold bugs are waiting for the big crash to happen, the big dollar crash to happen, so that gold will increase dramatically in value. It's such a trivial amount that the Chinese have reduced their debt, or excuse me, reduced their amount of U.S. debt that they have bought. It's still 1.2 trillion with a T. So they would have to continue to sell off a lot more before people would take notice. And as I have pointed out in Reflections in Sinoland and in radio interviews, the Chinese and or the Russians could bring down the dollar tomorrow by simply starting to sell large quantities of U.S. Treasury debt. That would cause the dollar to crash, inflation to spiral in the West, and it would be the end of the world as we know it. But I don't think the Chinese and the Russians want to do that. In fact, I think they're very happy for the West to continue to go on printing money in in their Mall of America-sized copy machines to pay for the worldwide military domination that the United States is imposing right now around the planet. They'll put up with that for as long as they can, as they get stronger and stronger, cooperate more and more, and get ready for when it finally does happen. I also don't think that the Chinese nor the Russians want to be the one, at least in the history books, that they wouldn't be writing, but in history books in general, I don't think they want to be the ones that are called the black hats. They were the ones that brought down the American dollar. I think they would much rather it to happen organically in the West by just general decay. Another possibility is that once the U.S. debt, federal debt, officially hits 20 trillion, although we know it's a lot more than that, just based on the 2011 audit of the Federal Reserve, which showed that the Federal Reserve secretly and illegally printed $16 trillion of money and gave it to the world's biggest banks and corporations, including many non-American banks and non-American companies. So actually the debt is way more than already 20 trillion. But once it's officially 20 trillion, that may cause the dollar to begin to falter. But as I have pointed out, if you go back in history and look at the reserve currencies of the world, you can go back 500 years of Western colonialism and economic domination of the planet. And it takes generations for these currencies to change their reserve status. At one time it was the Dutch florin, and then it was the French franc, and then it was the British pound. And even after the British pound began to falter after the Boer War at the turn of the 19th, 20th century, it still wasn't finally until World War I was sort of, the silver stake in the heart. But it actually wasn't until World War II that England was finally just flat broke, and the pound totally lost its status as a world reserve currency. So it takes a lot for reserve currencies to lose that status, and I think it might be another, unfortunately, for those that would like to see the Western empire and military domination of our planet end sooner than later. I think it may go on for a lot longer than we would like. Another thing that just happened this week, Henry Kissinger came to China to visit old friends and met with Xi Jinping. Of course, you know I'm writing Xi Jinping's diaries, a historical fiction called Red Letters, The Diaries of Xi Jinping. So I'm doing a lot of research on him right now. Kissinger met with him, and they talked about China, the United States, and I wrote in Xi's diary that she reminisces about the people like Kissinger and Nixon who had a more vision than the very narrow-minded ideological neocons that we have running the West right now. Not that Nixon and Kissinger were, altruists. They were they hated communism, but they hated the Russians worse than they hated the Chinese, and so they cut the deal with the Chinese and started their dialogue with Mao back in 1972, and of course eventually Jimmy Carter officially opened diplomatic relations with China in 1979. But it was interesting to see Kissinger over here, and to be honest, I was shocked. I did not see very much about him in the Western press that he was here. He was at the Great Hall of the People. He met with the President of China, and Kissinger stressed that this was now a time for the United States and China to sit down and talk about the world. Of course, that will never happen because the United States is a hardcore empire, and empires don't sit down and talk with their enemies. They only try to dominate them and control them and exterminate them. So that's not going to happen, but it was nice to see someone like Kissinger with all of his historical baggage with Vietnam, etc. But it was still nice to see him, and think about if we had someone like him and the Secretary of State than John Kerry, how the world might be a little different right now with the Russians and the Chinese. That's it for today. I'm going to continue to do a program like this, I hope about once a week, and looking forward to hearing any comments you have. Please leave them on my website, and thank you for listening.